In this film, we will show you how to increase CPAP using an algorithm. The normal starting settings for CPAP are 6 liters per minute total flow and 3 liters per minute of oxygen. That gives an FiO2 of 50%. The pressure should be at 6 centimeters of water in the bottle. However, many babies will need a higher level of treatment than this, in which case we need to gradually increase the level of CPAP treatment, one step at a time, until they respond.
The increasing CPAP algorithm gives a guide for how and when to increase treatment levels. However, it is just a guide, and experienced clinicians in well-staffed and equipped units may make changes on a case-by-case basis.
A baby that is struggling to breathe is likely to show this in 2 different ways. The first is that their oxygen saturation levels may be low. The second is that they may show increased work of breathing. CPAP treats both of these by using a combination of oxygen with gentle continuous pressure. Your first priority will be to quickly improve the low oxygen saturation. Improving the work of breathing is likely to take much longer.
There are 2 ways to increase the level of CPAP treatment. The first is to have a higher percentage of oxygen in the total flow, so an increased FiO2. The second is to increase the pressure by putting more water in the bottle.
If a baby has low saturation, this needs to be addressed quickly by stepping up the percentage of oxygen, and only increasing the pressure slightly if that does not work. Once the saturation levels are above 90%, the baby does not need more oxygen. However, if they continue to have increased work of breathing, they may need a bit more pressure. So, how would this work in practice? These are your starting settings. You always reassess the baby 15 minutes after starting CPAP. In terms of decision making, at this stage we are going to focus on the saturation levels. Are these now over 90%? If they are, then this shows the baby is responding to treatment, and so should remain on CPAP at these settings. You should monitor again an hour later, and then every 4 hours after that. But what do we do if the saturation levels are not above 90%? First, you always check that the CPAP is working properly and the baby is receiving the treatment. Make sure the water is bubbling. Also, check they don't need suctioning.
This is important. If there is a problem either with the machine or with blocked nostrils, increasing the treatment level without resolving these problems will not help the baby. So always resolve these problems before going to the next level of treatment.
If CPAP is delivering and the nostrils are clear, but the saturation levels have remained below 90%, then we need to increase treatment by 1 step. The FiO2 needs to go to 70%. That means increasing the oxygen flow meter from 3 to 4 liters per minute. After each change of treatment, you need to reassess 15 minutes later to make further changes if they are still needed. If the saturation is now above 90%, then the baby is responding. But if the saturation is below 90%, we need to once again increase the oxygen flow, this time to get 80% FiO2. This means putting the oxygen flow meter up to 4.5 liters per minute. Once again, check 15 minutes later. If the saturation has still not reached 90%, then you should increase treatment again. This time, put the FiO2 to 90%. which means an oxygen flow rate of 5 liters per minute. And also increase the pressure by adding 1 centimeter of water into the bottle from 6 to 7 centimeters. This is the final step you would do by yourself. Once again, monitor 15 minutes later. If the baby has still not responded, it's time to call for help. You need to get an urgent review from a clinician or more senior member of the team to look for complications or an alternative diagnosis.
This is quite unusual. It is much more common for babies to respond quite quickly to treatment in terms of their saturation levels. However, it can take much longer for their work of breathing to ease.
A much more common scenario will be that you have a baby whose saturation has improved soon after starting treatment. You will then monitor an hour later and again 4 hours later. If at 4 hours or at any other monitoring you find their saturation levels have gone down and the baby is not yet on the highest level of treatment, then once again you start raising the oxygen percentage until they respond. If, on the other hand, their saturation levels are now stable, you can move on to assess their work of breathing, which should be showing some improvement by now. If it has improved, then the baby is responding to treatment and so does not need further changes. But if they still have substantial work of breathing, then you will once again want to increase the treatment. Their oxygen saturation is now above 90%, so they don't need more oxygen. Instead, they need a bit more pressure to help get the air into their lungs. So here, you will add 1 centimeter of water into the bottle to bring it to 7 centimeters.
You have made a treatment change, so you would need to monitor again 15 minutes later. However, you would not expect the work of breathing to have changed significantly that quickly.
You would wait for 4 hours after making the change to assess the work of breathing again.
Your baby should now have saturation levels above 90%. These need to be checked at all subsequent monitoring times. If levels drop, then treatment can be increased to the maximum amount of 90% FiO2 and a centimeter of water can be added to the bottle. If this does not improve oxygen saturation, then you need to call once again for assistance from a senior member of the team. The water level in the bottle should not be increased above 8 centimeters of pressure.
Managing a very sick baby on CPAP, working out when and how to increase treatment can be a challenging task. Not all babies are the same, and what works for one baby may not work for the next.
If in doubt, call for help from a more senior or experienced member of the team.